The dust never settled on Dunlow Ranch. It hung in the air like something waiting to happen. Nathaniel Reeves stood at the edge of the property line, hat in hand, boots worn through at the heel. Behind him, 3 miles back, sat a small house with an empty chair at the table. His wife had been gone 11 months. The silence in that house had teeth. He wasn't a proud man, not anymore. Pride was a thing you could afford when someone was waiting for you at the end of the day. Now there was only his son, 8 years old, who hadn't spoken more than a few words since the funeral. Nathaniel needed work. He needed it the way a man needs air after being held underwater too long. The woman who owned this ranch was said to be hard. Fair, but hard. Widowed herself, though, longer ago, with a boy of her own who never seemed to smile at strangers. Nathaniel didn't know what he expected when he knocked. Maybe rejection, maybe pity, which would have been worse. What he didn't expect was for her to look past him, past his ragged coat and his hollow eyes, straight at the small boy sitting on the wagon seat. "That your son?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." She studied the boy a long moment. Then she said the words that would change everything. "I don't need another pair of hands, Mr. Reeves. My son needs a father, someone who knows what it costs a child to grow up without one showing up every day. So does yours by the look of him." Nathaniel didn't understand yet what she meant. He would. If stories of courage, family, and second chances speak to you, subscribe and join us for more unforgettable journeys across the American frontier. The town of Broken Elm didn't forgive easily. 3 years back, Margaret Dunlow had buried her husband after a horse threw him during a spring storm. She'd been left with 400 acres, a mortgage, and a boy named Silas, who stopped talking about his father the way most children stop talking about ghosts, quietly and all at once. People said Margaret should have sold the land, should have moved back east to her sisters. A woman alone couldn't run cattle through a Montana winter. That's what they said in the general store, in low voices that carried anyway. Margaret proved them wrong every single season. But proving people wrong cost something. It cost sleep. It cost her hands, calloused now like a man's. It cost her the softness she used to have, the kind her husband once said made her different from anyone he'd known. She didn't need a man to complete her ranch. She needed the ranch worked, yes. That was real, and she wouldn't pretend otherwise. But she needed something else too, something she hadn't said out loud to anyone. She needed her son to remember what it felt like to have a man's steady voice in the house again. That was why, when Nathaniel Reeves showed up at her gate with a boy who hadn't spoken in months, something in her chest recognized him before her mind caught up. Not attraction, not yet. Recognition. The kind that only comes from carrying the same weight. "I'll try you 2 weeks," she told him. "Wages and a roof over your boy's head while we see if this suits us both. Bunks in the barn loft for you. Your son can share the spare room with mine. They're close in age. Might do them both some good." Nathaniel wanted to argue. Pride told him to, but pride had already cost him too much. He nodded instead. That night, his son Owen sat across the supper table from Silas, 2 boys who understood loss in a way children shouldn't have to. Neither said a word, but Silas slid his biscuit across the table, and Owen took it. It wasn't much. It was everything. By the end of the first week, the 2 boys had built a fort out of hay bales in the barn's back corner, a place neither of their fathers, living or dead, had ever seen. Silas taught Owen where the barn cat kept her kittens. Owen taught Silas how to skip a flat stone across the stock pond, something his mother had shown him before she passed. Neither boy talked about what they'd lost. They didn't have to. Grief has a way of finding other grief without needing words for it, the same way 2 animals in a storm find each other in the dark. The 2 weeks came and went, and Margaret never mentioned them again. She simply kept setting a plate for Nathaniel at supper, and he simply kept showing up. Some things don't need to be renewed out loud. They just become true. The weeks that followed were the way ranch weeks always are. Long, brutal, unforgiving. Fences needed mending. Cattle needed moving before autumn turned hard into winter. Nathaniel worked harder than he'd worked in his life, not for wages, but because every swing of the axe was 1 less hour spent inside his own grief. Margaret watched him from the porch some evenings, watched the way he taught Owen to whittle, patient in a way most men weren't. Watched the way Silas began following Owen around, like a shadow finding its shape again. She told herself it was only about the ranch. She was lying, and she knew it. One evening, a storm rolled in fast across the ridge, the kind that turned the sky the color of an old bruise. Nathaniel was out mending the north fence when it hit. Margaret rode out herself, against every warning her own body gave her, because leaving a man alone in that kind of weather wasn't something she could live with. Lightning split the ridge just as she crested the hill, throwing his shape into white relief for half a second, before the dark swallowed it again. The wind carried the smell of wet sage and turned earth, and thunder rolled through her chest like something physical. She found him pinned under a fence post, leg twisted wrong, rain coming down like judgment, his hat gone somewhere in the mud beside him. "You shouldn't have come," he said through his teeth. "Wasn't a request," she said, and got to work freeing him. They rode back together in silence, his arm around her shoulder, her horse carrying double through the mud. The leg wasn't broken, but it was badly wrenched, and the doctor in town ordered him off it for a full 2 weeks. Nathaniel hated every day of it, watching from a chair while others did his work, his pride chafing worse than the injury. But by the time he was back on his feet, something between him and Margaret had shifted, not spoken, not named, but real. The town noticed before either of them admitted it to themselves. Whispers followed Margaret into church. A widow and her hired hand, sharing a table, sharing a life that looked too much like a family already. Some folks said it was improper, others said worse. One Sunday, old Mrs. Halloran made a point of it in front of the whole congregation, remarking loud enough to carry that some widows forgot themselves faster than others. Margaret didn't answer. She simply took Nathaniel's arm as they walked to the wagon, in full view of anyone still watching, and let the silence do what words couldn't. Margaret had survived worse than gossip, but she hadn't survived it while caring what someone thought of Nathaniel too. "They talk," she told him one night after the boys were asleep. "About us." "Let them," Nathaniel said. "I know what I see when I look at you. A man stops caring what strangers think once he's found something worth losing again." "That's a dangerous way to talk," she said quietly. "I already lost one man to this land." "I'm not him," Nathaniel said, "and I'm not leaving." It should have been enough. For a while, it was. Then Owen went missing. The boy had wandered off during a gather in late autumn, chasing after a calf that broke from the herd before anyone could stop him. Nobody noticed until the sun started dropping and Owen's chair sat empty at supper. Nathaniel's mind went to the worst place a father's mind can go. He'd already lost a wife. The idea of losing his son, too, wasn't fear. It was the end of everything. They searched until their torches burned low, canyon and creek bed, calling his name into wind that swallowed sound whole. Silas rode alongside them despite Margaret's protests, because Owen was the first friend he'd had since his father died, and some things a boy won't be talked out of. It was Silas who found him. Owen had fallen into a ravine chasing the calf, ankle broken, alone in the dark for 3 hours that felt like 3 lifetimes. Nathaniel carried his son back to the house himself, refusing every offer to spell him, his own leg still stiff from the fence post weeks before. Some weights a father carries alone, whether his body is healed all the way or not. That night, sitting beside Owen's bed as the boy slept off the fever from exposure, Nathaniel broke. "I can't lose him too," he said. "I can't do this again." Margaret sat beside him, didn't offer empty comfort, didn't tell him everything would be fine. "You didn't lose him," she said. "You found him. That's what a father does, not the man who never fails, the man who never stops looking." Something in Nathaniel loosened that night. Grief he'd been carrying like stone in his chest for 11 months finally had somewhere to go. Owen healed slowly through the following weeks, and something else healed alongside him. He spoke his first full sentence since his mother's death on a cold morning in the barn, asking Silas if he wanted to see the horse he'd been training. Margaret cried when she heard it, standing just out of sight behind the barn door. Nathaniel found her there. "He's talking again," she said, wiping her face quickly, embarrassed to be caught in something so tender. "Because of you," Nathaniel said. You told me once your son needed a father. Turns out mine did too. You gave us both a place to be a family again before either of us knew we needed one." "I told you Silas needed a father," Margaret said. "I didn't know I needed one for myself too, not just for him." Nathaniel took her hand, calloused and sure. "Then let me stay. Not as a hand you took on for 2 weeks, as something more, for good." She didn't answer with words. She answered by not letting go. By the following spring, half a year and 2 hard seasons after Nathaniel had first walked through that gate a broken man, the town of Broken Elm had a new topic for its whispers. A wedding, small and simple, held at the ranch under a sky finally clear of storms. 2 boys stood together as brothers instead of strangers who shared a supper table. The land hadn't gotten easier. Montana never did. But the house wasn't silent anymore. Laughter moved through those rooms the way sunlight moves through dust, slow, golden, unstoppable once it starts. Nathaniel Reeves had come to that gate asking for a job. He left it with something no wage could have paid him. Margaret had said her son needed a father. What she hadn't known was that saying it out loud would give her one too, and give Nathaniel a reason to stop merely surviving and start living again. Somewhere, in the quiet of that ranch house at dusk, 2 boys sat on the porch steps, watching the horizon the way children do when they finally stopped waiting for something bad to happen. They were simply waiting for tomorrow. And for the first time in a long while, so was everyone else in that house.